Welcome, welcome. I am sorry that I am not with you today, but I will return tomorrow. In the meantime, I'm with you in spirit anyway, and I'll be guiding you through a revision activity. Today we talk about the passive voice, something that I have alluded to several times over the quarter, especially in the marks that I've made on your papers. You're looking for the pass marks on your papers, and that means that you should take a moment to grab those past papers that you've written for me. Everything that contains any sort of green revision mark. You're looking for passive voice errors in your papers. I'm going to take a little bit of time to pause while you grab all of that past work. Okay. If you're still finding work, just do so quietly and try to pay attention at the same time. First of all, let's define the passive voice. The passive voice also, by the way, is available in your Warriner's English Grammar and Composition textbook. So if you have that textbook nearby, as you should today, then you can turn it to page 153, and you'll find a definition and a little discussion that's a very clear discussion and a very helpful one on using the passive voice, or when you should and when you shouldn't. The passive voice is defined as a sentence where the subject does not act the verb. So there's a problem between the subject and the verb. The subject isn't actually doing the verb. Instead, the action of the verb is being done to the subject. In other words, the subject is passive. Here's an example. The car was driven down the street. Basic analysis figures car as your subject and was driven as your verb. The breakdown occurs because the driving action is being done to the car is not actually driving it. This is passive. The active voice would be any sentence written where the subject does the verb. So if I say, I read the book, I am reading a book, therefore the subject acts the verb. If I write the sentence, the book was read by me is the object of a prepositional phrase in the predicate and doesn't actually do the verb directly, not in the grammar sense anyway. The book is the subject and the action is being done to it. The passive verb always contains two parts, and I emphasize this to students time and time again when they try to identify the passive voice. It always contains two parts. One is a form of the verb to be. The other is a past participle. It looks like a past tense verb. Sometimes it's ed, sometimes it's en, it depends. But you will always have some form of the verb to be and a past participle verb. Here's a revision. John drove the car down the street. I simply placed a subject in there that could act the verb. I didn't see one initially, so I placed one in there. Another possible revision, the car drove down the street. So you could make the car actually drive, although that doesn't seem to make as much sense. You could include another verb like rumbled or rambled or careened down the street. Any of those would work as well. But in this case, the important thing is that the subject is doing the verb in both sentences. There are three different ways of revising the passive voice, and the examples that I just showed modeled two of them. So we're going to look at them one at a time. One of these strategies should work. There's a fourth strategy, and that's to totally trash the sentence and start over from scratch if none of these three works. However, one of them should work. First, you could flip the subject with an acting noun and the predicate. The predicate noun usually follows the preposition by. Think about the example that I just gave you earlier. The book was read by me. If I take that subject, or I'm sorry, that object of the prepositional phrase, me, and I flip it with the book, then I've created an active sentence. I read the book. Look for the by phrase, the by prepositional phrase. Take that object out, place it in the subject position, and you should be good. The second is to think about what acting subject has been implied. Now, I practiced that with the John drove the car down the street example. I thought, well, who's driving the car? And I placed that implied acting subject into the sentence. Now, usually an author can answer that question of who is doing the action. Sometimes the reader can if there's enough context material to help the inference. But the implication sometimes needs the author's help. The second revision that I practiced on the car sentence kept that same subject but changed the verb into an active position. So I simply kept the car and said drove, or the car rumbled. I could change the verb and make the verb active. So I can change that verb, there's no rule against it, and I can keep that subject if I very much like that subject in the position it is. Your Warreners will tell you a few different reasons why you might want to use the passive voice. And before any of you complain about science research, yes, I understand Mrs. Cobot's position is a correct position on the writing of material for science. Science does use the passive voice, and there are many reasons for this, but often including an active subject confuses scientific communication, does not assist it. But we're not in science class. We are in a class that looks at literary analysis with authors as subjects. We're in a class that looks at argumentation and persuasion. We're usually looking at subjects. So most of the time, we will use the passive voice. However, you should be aware of when not to. If you really don't know what the acting subject is, or no acting subject exists, then you can't include one. So here's an example. No bodies were ever found. Maybe you're not quite sure who was looking for the bodies. Maybe the people looking for the bodies are an amorphous government agency. You're not quite sure who. Or maybe it's a combination of a number of different agencies looking for bodies. You don't have the time or space to list all of the people looking for the bodies, so perhaps you simply want to write no bodies were ever found. You may want your subject to appear passive. You may want your subject to feel like a victim of that verb. In this case, the man was murdered. The verb murdered itself carries an extraordinarily negative connotation. You may want that negative connotation assisted by including the subject in a passive position. So the passivity of the subject amplifies the negative connotation of the verb and makes the sentence come across on a number of different levels. So using the passive voice here is an intelligent move. Here's my warning. It weakens your authority and it impedes your clarity in most cases. You want to avoid it. You only use it if you know why you're using it. If you don't know why you're using it, do not use it. Revise it away. If you try to revise it away and you have exceptional trouble revising it away, then seek help, first of all. And if help is not available, you may wish to keep it. You may determine that you want to use the passive voice in this case. And as I said before, don't beat yourself up over your science research reports when you're trying to proof away the passive voice. I'll worry about this class, and I would worry about any sort of history or social studies classes as well to remove the passive voice. Today I'd like you to take a look at the Warriner's exercises on page 156. So turn your book to that right now. Exercise 19. Let's take a look at the first example. I'm going to ask you to do some of these today, and I'll do the first one for you. After the car had been washed by us, it was waxed and polished by the attendant. We have passive voice in two places. Notice that had been is some form of the verb to be, and washed is a past participle. This subject, car, is being washed. It is not doing the washing. Secondly, here's my subject, it, and was waxed, once again, two-part verb, and polished. It's actually a compound verb, so you have was that carries over to waxed, was that carries over to polished. So what you want to do, once again, is try to revise this. This is the easy revision, the number one revision. You can see the by phrase that contains acting subjects. So the simple revision for this is to take those acting subjects and place them in the subject position. And then you've got we had washed, and you have the attendant waxed and polished. Now the subjects are actually doing those verbs, and everything is happy. I want you to complete the Warriner's exercises on that same page, exercise 19, 2 through 6. And then I want you to complete 2 from your own writing. So let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I want 7 examples of passive voice revision. Write with your revisions, make sure you're writing the original sentence and labeling it original. So write original and then colon and then your original sentence with your own revisions, and then write the revision and label it revision. So revision colon and write the revised sentence. Be sure to write your name, class period, and passive revisions at the top. Make sure to complete all of those Warriner's exercises, 2 through 6, and your 2 revisions, and turn that in before the end of the class period. If you have any sort of problems with that, please let me know tomorrow. Remember to help each other. This is not a test environment, so you may work together if you wish, and work on your own revisions as well as the ones out of the book.